Copper has been critical to telecommunications networks for more than 100 years. We're still seeing new innovations and applications being introduced that largely involve getting more bandwidth out of this tremendously hardy infrastructure. But now copper is set to move into the 4G mobile era in a way never previously imagined. At Total Telecom TV, we're talking exclusively to Stephen Cooke, President and CTO of Genesis Technical Systems, about how copper can be a perfect match for small cell backhaul in LTE networks right across the world. Stephen, just tell us, how can this be achieved? How can copper play such a critical role?
So what most people don't understand about next generation wireless networks is that you can't just go to an existing 3G network, take out the 3G radios, put in 4G radios, and voila, you have a 4G network. It just doesn't work that way. The bandwidth requirements are far too high. So what the entire network or the entire industry has landed on is this concept of small cells. So instead of the requirement of having to provide 10 times the number of big masts and cellular base stations, what they've decided is they will come up with hundreds of small cells. These small cells will reuse existing infrastructure, storefronts and so on, to provide that coverage that you can't get with the existing 3G network.
But that must cause considerable problems. I mean, is power one of them, for example?
Well, exactly. So the problem is that small cells need two things mainly: power and backhaul bandwidth. So if you don't have that backhaul bandwidth, it doesn't matter if you have power, and vice versa. So the copper network of a major incumbent telephone company, for instance, can carry power, and it does carry power today, but it can also provide that bandwidth for the backhaul. So it is a perfect medium, a perfect deployment platform for next generation wireless networks.
So this is a way for a fixed line network operator to move into 4G in a way that perhaps a conventional mobile only operator may not be able to.
Well, that's exactly right, Brian, because those networks, those already installed copper networks, we all know that copper is a brilliant electrical conductor, so it can provide power. But it can also, via bonded DSL connections, for example, provide large amounts of bandwidth into areas that are already covered by that network. It's just reusing that network in a different way.
But also in a way that's tremendously economical if you're a fixed line operator.
Very much so. For example, a lot of, let's say, non-fixed line operators, they cannot use that copper infrastructure the way the incumbent can. They have to come up with alternatives like non-line of sight or microwave backhaul. None of those really make sense for a fixed line incumbent. That fixed line incumbent can use or reuse their existing copper infrastructure to provide power to small cells, but also to the actual, or provide the backhaul bandwidth for those small cells. Not only that, but they are already deployed in areas that require that bandwidth. So for instance, most mobile access happens in the home, in the coffee shop, or in the office, for instance. So if you have a home office, all three of them are in one place.
It sounds fantastic. How does it actually work?
So what you have is the copper network that goes into your neighborhood, for example, comes to a little green box on the street corner or to a telegraph pole or something. It then fans out to everyone's house. Well, if you bond all of those copper pairs going to that telegraph pole or to that little green box, you can create a bandwidth pool that can service a small cell, can provide power to that small cell, but can also still provide much higher bandwidth to the people that are served by that green box or telegraph pole.
So it's an example of convergence that perhaps we never really envisaged.
Well, very much so. No one ever envisaged, as you say, 100 years ago, that they could use that copper for next generation mobile networks.
It's incredible. Now, I think you're going to be talking about this in Dallas at a small cells event next month.
That's absolutely true. Telcos such as Verizon and AT&T will be present talking about their small cells. And they have absolutely the infrastructure that can benefit from this. So they could deploy more small cells than virtually anyone.
Well, it looks like we're going to have copper for even longer than any of us ever thought before. Thanks very much for sharing that with us, Stephen.
Thank you very much for your time, Brian.